They're two happy women bringing you inspiring stories, politics, pop culture, and lifestyle hacks, all with an eye to making our communities and our country a better place to live. It's the Happy Women Podcast with your hosts, Jen Horn and Katie Gorka.
Thanks for joining us and welcome to another episode of the Happy Women Podcast. I'm Jennifer Horn.
And I'm Katie Gorka.
And I'm really excited today, Katie, because it's a show. Well, this show's always about a little bit of girl power. I mean, let's be honest. It's the Happy Women Podcast. It's in the name. But we are going to talk about women's sports today and the battle to protect women's sports. And joining us today, I'm super excited to introduce you to Kaitlynn Wheeler. She is an ambassador for the Riley Gaines Center at the Leadership Institute. She is also an incredible swimmer herself. She swam as well for Team USA. She's also been an NCAA swimmer. She works for Turning Point USA. She's an incredible talent, and you can give her a follow at Wheeler Kaitlynn on X. Kaitlynn Wheeler, thank you so much for being with us today. Welcome to Happy Women.
Thank you, Jen and Katie, for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Well, before we get started into the political stuff, we always love to hear people's stories, and you are an incredible talent. You're doing incredible things in a field that's really, really competitive. So take us through your story before we get started here.
Yeah, I think it all starts with my beginning in sports, which was swimming. I started swimming when I was 4 years old. I quickly fell in love with it. I made it my goal to swim in college, and I was fortunate enough to be offered a scholarship to swim at the University of Kentucky, where I met Riley. We were teammates. She was just a year older than me, but she swam the same events as me, so we were training partners for the 3 years we were together. Very, very much pushed each other to be the best we could be. She was most of the time usually scaling ahead of me, but I was always at her tail trying to keep up. But I had to compete. It was at the NCAA meet where many of you have probably heard the name Leah Thomas. Riley has been very outspoken about her story, and it's gained really worldwide news at this point. We had to compete against this man. We had a change in a locker room with him. So it was definitely one of the biggest stories, I think, that kind of broke and started this whole movement. And ever since then, we've seen more and more girls be impacted, not just in sports, but in their spaces. We've seen it in women's prisons. We've seen it in sororities and domestic violence shelters. I think the list goes on, but that's all to say that was kind of what kind of got me into it. I think it definitely opened my eyes as to what is really going on. But my family's been impacted by it. I had a younger sister that was just 16 years old at the time. It was a year after my experience at the NCAA meet. She was kicked off of her swim team and banned from a YMCA of all places because she spoke up about men going into the locker rooms and changing with these young underage girls. So that was the pivotal point for me to realize. I think after my own experience, I had hoped, or I think maybe I was naive to think that this issue would go away. There's no way that people would allow this to continue to happen. You know, it's a common sense issue. I think it takes a matter of a second to realize that men and women are different, because that's the message that we're sending over and over again is men and women are different. There are only two sexes. You can't change your sex, and each sex is deserving of equal opportunity. And so that's really all we're fighting for here and asking for. And so that's what kind of got me into this whole world. But I'm very hopeful because so many more women are continuing to speak out, and it's really uplifting.
So I have a question that I have been dying to ask. I don't know if you're going to feel comfortable answering it, but I'm going to ask you. What do you think drove Leah Thomas? Do you think did he really believe that he was a woman? Was he mentally unstable? Was it the cool thing to do? The whole thing baffled me. So I'm just curious, what's your take on that?
You know, I never spoke to him or had really a face-to-face interaction other than in the locker rooms. I was like 10 feet from him changing. And I think even in that moment, I wanted to ask him, you know, do you really think that this is right? Do you think it's fair? Do you think that morally, like, it was almost that he was mocking all of the women there. It was, to me, an utter disrespect of every single female athlete who had worked essentially their entire lives. You know, you put your world revolves at this point around your sport, especially when you're competing at the elite level that you are. And this meet is arguably one of the fastest meets in the entire world. And so it was really just a slap in the face. I felt like it was just an utter disregard for us, for all the female athletes that were at that meet, but also his teammates. See, this was a man who was mediocre at best. He was ranked in the 500s at best in the men's category, and then started competing in the women's category and was, beating out world record holders, phenoms of the sport by body lengths. I mean, this wasn't just a matter of tenths of a second here. He was finishing ahead by body lengths. And in the sport of swimming, that is a lot. And so to me, it was just a slap in the face. It was an utter disregard for our hard work and our opportunities and our, equality really just in our sports. And in the locker rooms, again, we deserved privacy in our areas of dressing. And it was an utter disregard of that. And to the NCAA, they're the ones who I point the finger at, because they're the ones who allowed this to happen. I felt betrayed mostly by the organization, who, ironically enough, that very same year was celebrating the 50th anniversary of Title IX, which to me, they handed you these T-shirts right when you walked in the door that on the back said, Title IX implemented in 1972 for equal opportunity, fairness. I'm like, all of these words, all these virtuous words that very same meet were doing the exact opposite to every single female athlete there. And so I felt betrayed by that organization. That's when I finally started to think, maybe we shouldn't just blindly follow or trust these organizations who claim to have our best interests at heart when in fact they don't, and they're showing it.
It's really interesting. We used to protect women. And I know Katie has a story about Title IX, which we'll get into as well. It was a huge, huge win for women, and it's now being threatened once again. But Caitlynn, I need to know about that time during the NCAA meet. You see this, you're not happy about it. You have to change next to a man that doesn't seem comfortable or right. Riley Gaines is seeing this. Other members of your team are seeing it. What happens when you start speaking out? What was the response immediately after?
I think, and a lot of which I'm sure we'll touch on later, the volleyball girls and the Mountain West Conference are facing now, there's a lot of institutional intimidation. See, our universities, along with Paula Scanlon, who was teammates with Leah Thomas, there was a lot of institutional intimidation. There was a lot of saying, you're not going to get into grad school. You're not going to find a job. You're going to lose all your friends. You're going to lose out all of these opportunities if you speak out. And remember, you wear our name across your chest, and you signed a scholarship, and that means you represent us. So there was a lot of emotional blackmail that they put on us as athletes. But really a lot of it is empty threats. I haven't had a single opportunity. If anything, I've had more opportunities be handed my way. But it's truly, it is scary to speak out and speak the truth. I think I was more scared before I took the stance I have now. But really after speaking out, I have to say it is truly a liberating experience to be able to stand up and speak up for what you believe in. And so a lot of young girls talk to me. They're like, you receive all of this hate. Well, I just have to say all of the hate I receive are comments and DMs on social media by accounts that have no profile pictures. It's these people who are reaching out behind the screens and saying these horrible, awful things, which are just name calling and criticizing your appearance, which to me, when you don't have an argument and you've lost, you resort to name calling. And so that's the way I see it. But the overwhelming majority of people, we know the statistics show, is over 70% of our entire country, which I would argue it's even higher than that now, support us. And it's definitely evident. I have not had a single person come up to me face to face and tell me that they disagree with me or disagree with my stance. I've had people at my last event I was at here in Illinois, at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. I've had them call me awful words, awful names. But that's all they say, because there's no real argument or anything that's based in common sense, science, truth, or reality for that matter, that they can argue back on this topic. And I think sadly what this has come to, it's been blown up into a political issue, when really this is not a political issue. This should in fact be a unifying issue. Our country is so polarized, arguably the most divided it's ever been. And this should be an issue that is based in common sense. It's based in reality, aside from biblical truth, which I believe that's where real truth comes from. This should be an issue that unifies us as a country, but it's in fact done the opposite. Unfortunately, I think we have elected officials and people in leadership positions, our current and presidential administration, that don't see it that way. But I don't think that's representative to our country as a whole. And I think that's why we need new leadership.
I love the message that you're sending out to other women by saying that it was scary at first, but then you realize it really doesn't touch you. It doesn't hurt you. And it's so empowering to be able to stand up for what you believe in. And I just think for those of us who've been through it in one way or another, I took a lot of flack as well for joining the Trump administration. And in fact, one time even went and there was a demonstration at American University because my office was right up there at the Department of Homeland Security. And there were a bunch of students at American University protesting against my husband. And I got out of the car and I went up and I talked to them. I wasn't going to just drive past and ignore it. And what you realize in those instances is, first of all, you can actually accomplish a lot in changing minds, but you also realize they really can't touch you. They really can't hurt you. And this is how we turn it around, is by standing up. So I just love that message that you're sending to people. Your personal witness is just super, super, super important. And the example that you're setting. I want to ask you another question. And that is, when this was happening, especially the NCAA race, where did your parents come down on this? Because I've always felt really strongly, I wanted to see the dads especially kind of stand up in this case. And I'm just curious, how did your parents feel about this?
Well, unfortunately, my parents weren't able to come to that meet. It was quite a distance from my home. And so my parents weren't able to be at the meet, but I remember calling my parents and telling them it was actually after going into the locker room and experiencing what I experienced with Leah Thomas, where I was fully exposed and changing, and turned around and saw him doing the exact same thing. It was honestly traumatizing. And so the first thing I did was I called my parents and I told them what happened. And honestly, if my dad, I say this kind of in a joking way, but I'm very serious when I say, if he were at that meet, he probably would have been arrested and pulled out by the police, because he would have been in that locker room defending his daughter, which I think is at least should be the instinctual reaction of any parent who sees or hears their daughter being in that type of environment. And so
Amen. I totally agree. Yeah.
They were outraged. And I think a lot of parents were. We were just hoping, I think, as the athletes, you go into these meets. This is a meet we've been preparing for 9 months, if not more. And so when we got to this meet, we weren't necessarily having to think about, oh, what are we supposed to do? We had hoped that maybe someone, a coach, an official, a parent, someone in the NCAA or with political power would stand up and do something about it, because we're told, focus on your race, focus on you, focus on your mental preparation. And so to have this there as well, it definitely affects your mental and physical preparation. I tried to time the locker rooms where I knew Thomas had already gone in and changed and come out, which we shouldn't have to do that. Like, even hearing myself say it, women shouldn't have to do that. We shouldn't have to worry. I have girls coming up to me and saying, I've been raped and sexually assaulted in my past. Like, now I have to go into bathrooms and worry about there being men in there as well. That's so horrible. And that's not how we should be treating our female athletes. That shouldn't be how we treat women in general.
It's amazing. And that's something I hadn't even considered, Caitlynn. And I think it's such a great point. When we heard about this, when this story started to break, you think you're outraged because it's not fair, because you've got men competing in women's sports, but you don't even, and of course you think about the dangers of having men in the women's locker room and all of that, but the distraction, that really is a mind game. So much of your performance as an athlete is whether your mind is connected to what your body is doing. And when you're worrying about when you've got to run into the locker room to change so you can do that safely, that's a huge element of this that I don't think that I had considered before. And in swimming, you're obviously not having like hand-to-hand physical combat, but we've seen in the Olympics this time around, in the Summer Olympics with the boxing, and volleyball, of course, has been huge. Not only do you have the mind games that this is doing, but now the physical danger in some of these sports where women are getting significantly hurt. It's not just about winning or losing anymore.
Yeah, I think that comes down to really the biological realities, the undeniable biological realities, which they always say, look to the science. And we are looking to the science, and the science is in our favor. We know that men are stronger, they're faster, they have greater lung capacity, they have larger heart muscles, they have more muscle mass naturally. And these advantages don't just disappear with hormone treatments and this HRT that they go through. We're divided by sex for a reason, because biology matters. It matters. And categories, they want to say, inclusivity, this very virtuous word that sounds great and everything. But sporting categories were created to be exactly the opposite of that. They were created to be explicitly, they were created to be specifically,
like exclusive?
Not inclusive. Yes, specifically exclusive. Sorry. Yes. Thank you. So the very essence in competition is undermined when we ignore these biological realities. And we've seen that. We've seen women who have their teeth been knocked out because they had a male opponent hit a puck in field hockey right in their face and knock their teeth out. Peyton McNabb, which is another big story that caught a lot of news, she was a volleyball player, was playing against a team who had a male opponent on the team. He jumped up and spiked the ball, hit Peyton right in the face, knocked her unconscious. To this day, she still has to go to weekly doctor's appointments for that concussion that she received. She has a permanent learning disability now. She wasn't able to go and play in college like she was supposed to. She had a scholarship to play softball in college. That was actually her sport, and not volleyball. But she can no longer do those things. And so we've seen this in multiple cases. These are just a few I'm listing. And it's going to continue to happen. And my question is, what is it going to take for these universities, for these institutions to realize that this is not only an equality issue here, this is a safety issue for female athletes. Yes, there are injuries that come in sports. That is a risk you take with some of these more physical sports. But we shouldn't have to be worrying about an even higher risk because we're allowing men into our sports.
So I have to say, I have a particular interest in the whole thing because I did get to be there at the beginning of Title IX. So I was a college soccer player at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And my first couple of years of playing, we were a club team. And because we didn't have the resources that the men's sports teams had, we would have to drive, I remember, 8-10 hours to find teams to compete with. And then, of course, we became part of the NCAA, and it just completely changed the picture. So I feel like, all the gains that were made then, we're losing. And it just baffles me. And it baffles me, especially, I think, that so many women are staying silent on this. I think about, like even sort of the feminists. I feel like they're not standing up to defend the women. Okay, but let's put this aside. I really want to talk now about the Turning Point chapter, because I'm such a fan of Charlie Kirk. I think what he is doing is I just don't even think we can begin to really measure how impactful and important it is what he's doing, because one of the big problems we're facing is the way our schools have been taken over by the whole DEI regime. And it has just made things really, really tough. And yet here he comes along, and not only does he challenge it head on, but I feel like he's really kind of made it cool to be conservative. He's made it safe to be conservative, and he's even made it cool to be conservative. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about how you got connected with them and what it's like to be inside of that, and what are some of the ways that you are pushing back from there? It's no secret. The world's unpredictable. One moment, everything's fine, and the next, the power's out and the cell towers are down. But with a satellite phone from sat123.com, you don't have to be cut off from the world. No matter where you are or what's happening, Sat123 keeps you connected. Whether you're deep in the mountains, on the road, or dealing with a natural disaster, your satellite phone will work when nothing else does. This is about being prepared. Sat123.com is family-owned, American-built, and focused on keeping you safe. They understand that in today's world, connection is more than convenience. It's essential. So here's the deal. Go to sat123.com and use code Katie for $25 off your first purchase. Don't get caught off guard. Stay connected. Stay prepared with SAT-123.
Yeah, so I got invited by the Turning Point chapter there at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. This was on 10/10, October 10th. And this day we have declared Real Women's Day. Riley had thought of this idea because we had organizations such as ESPN, who is a huge platform for sports. They were highlighting real women or famous women and very accomplished female athletes. And they were highlighting men instead of women, these men who were pretending to be women. And she was like, you know what? We need a day that's going to recognize real women because we deserve to be recognized. Our hard work and our dedication and our sacrifices deserve to be recognized. And so she thought up this day, 10/10 day, which 10/10 in chromosomes is XX, which marks the chromosomes for a real woman, XY being men chromosomes. And so this day we were celebrating, and I was invited to come to campus by this Turning Point chapter. They were hosting me as a speaker. And obviously I was like, yes, this is also a great opportunity to come back to my home state of Illinois. I thought, I was naive to think that I would be welcomed with open arms, but that was not at all the welcome I received, at least from the students on campus. Leading into the event, I was reached out multiple times by the Turning Point chapter that said we were receiving a lot of threats, a lot of violent threats from students on campus, specifically an organization on campus, which is known to host very radical events on campus, including a lot of anti-Semitic rallies, which is crazy that the message that I'm sending is one that's pro-women, it's pro opportunity and fairness, and all these are good things. These are things that people should want. I can't imagine someone not wanting them. Was deemed as hateful. I was receiving DMs on social media of these people saying really awful things I can't even say on here, telling me that I would regret coming to campus if I came, telling me that we don't want you here, your message is not welcome here. And these are the same group of people who claim to be tolerant and loving and accepting of everyone. And it was the exact opposite of that. And so my event got moved from off campus, which I wasn't happy about because I wanted to go to the campus, to the students, to talk to them. It got moved to an off campus location. And then the same thing was happening there. There was receiving a lot of threats, and the local police department actually picked it up. They said, we'll host you at our police station. So we actually moved the event to a police station there off campus.
My gosh.
But I showed up there. There were over 50 protesters showed up. They were wielding metal poles and sticks and signs and noisemakers. They were all wearing their masks. They all love to wear the masks and hide behind them. But they were very, very loud. And I think we're there to send the message of we don't want you here. At least that's what I was getting. But I stood inside and they banged on the windows during my speech. They were trying to drown out the noise.
At the police station. I'm just
Crazy.
really curious. Did the police do anything to stop it?
So, what was crazy was I was kind of looking around at the police and kind of wondering if they would stop them banging on the windows. I mean, when I tell you, they were literally shaking the walls of the building. I thought that at any moment they were going to break the glass of the windows. And I was like, well, how long is it going to take before they make them stop? And what was weird was I found the police seemed to be a little hesitant to even cause any issues or further the situation. My dad, my parents, my family was there. And so I was worried for their safety. If something were to happen, if a window were to break and they were to come crawling in to the building, I almost wondered if the police would do anything. And so I worried for the safety of my family. I worried for the safety of the attendees that were at the event, who were actually trying to listen and hear what I had to say, which again was a message that was not based in a political propaganda or scheme or anything like that. And so it was a crazy, crazy, crazy experience. And the whole time I was speaking, I almost felt like God broke my heart for these people that were outside, these people who I feel are just lost and just can't see the truth. And I would love to be able to sit down with them one-on-one and have a conversation. But these people refuse to have any type of conversation. They refuse to hear what you have to say. And so unfortunately, I just felt my heart breaking for them. And I was able to deliver my speech. I think it was hard for some of the people there to like hear me because they were being so audibly loud that it did drown out some of the noise, but it still didn't deter me from delivering the message that I came there to deliver. It only reaffirmed and told me that I was in the right place, and these people need to hear truth now more than ever. And that's not just for that campus, it's campuses across the country. And that's why organizations like the Turning Point chapters on these campuses are so important, because so many students, I can say this because I just left college campus myself, the freedom of speech and truth are like, it is being fought. It's being stifled on these college campuses. And so we need more people. We need more organizations who are going to allow these students to come and have camaraderie in the fact that they're not alone, and their voice deserves to be heard. Their voices, you're allowed free speech. That is definitely something that is on the line here. And so I'm so thankful for those organizations. But it confirmed to me that all of this is for an even greater reason. We need to start speaking truth, and we need more people to do that.
You're incredibly brave, and you're incredibly right. I think for far too long, we've all been just patting people on the head saying this is okay, or you can believe whatever you want to believe. The only thing that is going to save us is truth. And the sad thing is that those people who were trying to scare you away from speaking are probably the same people who would have been standing with you to protect women 50 years ago when Title IX was being introduced. They have completely changed. I want to ask you about a town hall that President Trump had this week. President Trump did a town hall with all women. He did it in Georgia and was asked all kinds of questions. They always say Trump has a woman problem, right? So he has to take these questions. And one of them was about this very issue, about men competing in women's sports. And they said, what can you do about it? And he had a very simple answer, very Trumpian. He said, I'm president. I'll just stop it. I'll ban it. I'll just stop it. We won't do it anymore. Is something like that possible, do you think, Kaitlynn? Or what is the answer here? It's more than a handful now. It used to be just Leah Thomas. Now it's more than a handful of men competing in women's sports. So what is the answer? What's the solution? Do you need politicians to get involved to make it stop?
I definitely think it comes down to the legal fight, too, because in many of these states we're fighting. We're trying to put bills in place that prevent the misinterpretation. We're having to put bills in place that define words like woman and man and mother and father and girl, boy. We have to put into legal statute what these words and definitions actually mean, because they've been misinterpreted, just much like Title IX has. They've misinterpreted what Title IX's original implementation was. And in that original implementation, they weren't thinking about gender identity as a factor there. They were talking about men and women being those with XX chromosomes and men being those with XY chromosomes. And so unfortunately, we're fighting in these states. But we have a lot of pushback because our leadership refuses to stand up and enforce the original implementation of Title IX. In fact, our current administration, rewrote Title IX, which I think we should definitely talk about. In this rewrite, and let me just say that the original piece of legislation enacted back in 1972 for the Education Amendments of the Civil Rights Act, it was 37 words long. And this new rewrite that they have now introduced as of August 1st is over 500,000 words long. This is 1,577 pages long. And basically, in a nutshell, what this does is it equates sex with gender identity, meaning that men who identify as women, not only can they take academic scholarships away from women, they can take athletic scholarships away. They can be housed in women's dormitories. They can play on their teams. Speech will be compelled. So any athlete, student, coach, administrator, anyone in these universities that are federally funded must abide by preferred pronouns, or I say biologically incorrect pronouns. And if they don't, they can be punished and possibly charged with sexual harassment. That is what this rewrite has done. And it went into effect August 1st. But when they introduced this rewrite earlier in the year, I believe it was in July, many states fought back. We had 26 states attorney generals filed to sue and block the illegal rewrite of the Biden-Harris administration's rewrite of Title IX. And we've seen now 21 of those states have a preliminary injunction where the rewrite is not in effect in those states, which is amazing. I think that is incredible to have over half the country fighting back. And I think that we need more states to fight back because it's continuing to happen, if not more, being allowed to happen. And it's hard to fight when you have laws in place that are allowing it to happen. So I think that comes with voting, like you said, for people, whether you're on one side of this issue or the other. I think most people should be on the common sense and side of reality, should be voting for people who are going to put legislation and policies in place, uphold the original implementation of Title IX, which is a good thing. It is pro-women, and I think everyone should be pro-women here. Voting for people who are going to put those policies in place and protect women. And President Trump has mentioned that. He said he's going to keep men out of women's sports, and I think he will do the same for our spaces as well.
So in our last couple minutes, tell us about the work of the Riley Gaines Center and how can we help? How can we support this incredibly important work?
Yeah, so the center, we really just focus on amplifying the voices of these young girls, these parents who are reaching out for help, it being a resource for them, not only a platform for their voices to be heard, but also equipping them with tools and resources to educate themselves and be able to speak on this issue for themselves, empowering these young women, these parents, these athletes, to speak up about this. We actually introduced a new project. It's called Project Boycott, which we've seen the Mountain West Conference. They've started boycotting games against San Jose State that have a male player on their team, Blair Fleming. So we've seen this project kind of starting to flourish here. And people really, women specifically, taking a stance against the injustice of allowing men into our sports and our spaces. And so that's just one. And so I just encourage anyone who's listening, if they're going through something like this, or they know someone who's going like this, or have a family member, please reach out to us, because we would love for one to hear your story, but also amplify your voice and help you advocate for yourselves, because it is important. And we need more and more people to start fighting back on it.
Absolutely. And you're so incredible. Your story is amazing. Your bravery and your courage. I don't know how many people would stand up there in the middle of a police station and continue speaking with the windows rattling. I mean, it's just, you're incredible. And we hope that you'll come back and chat with us some more, and want to refer you to the Riley Gaines Center at the Leadership Institute. Help out if you can. Get involved. They do great work over there. And make sure you're following Kaitlynn Wheeler as well. All you have to do is find her on X, Wheeler Caitlynn. Kaitlynn, thanks so much. And congratulations on your graduation. We know you've got great, huge things ahead of you.
Thank you all both so much for having me.
Thank you. Riley Gaines Center doing such a great job. And thank you all for joining us. Make sure you get Katie's book. It's called Next Gen Marxism, available wherever you get your books. And of course, you can check out her website, katiegorka.org. You can search her out on Facebook. Just look for Kaitlynn Gorka, or on X, Gorka Katie. You can find me on social media as well, Facebook and Instagram, Jennifer Horn Radio, and on X and on Truth at Jennifer Horn. And we thank you so much for supporting this podcast. Those 5-star reviews really help us with the algorithm, and we want you to connect with us on all our platforms. All you have to do to find us in all of those spots where we are, SalemPodcastNetwork.com. Just look for Happy Women on the homepage. Thanks so much for joining us. This is another episode of the Happy Women Podcast.